Hello, welcome to Scouting Basics with Crew 4005. My name is Jacob Homer, and today we're going to be going over knife safety. First off, we're going to be starting with the blade regulations in both scouting and your general area. So in scouting, there is no set blade limits. You can technically have any blade that you want and bring it to scouting as long as it fits the other regulations of your areas. However, scouting does go with the general rule of use the best tool for the job. So don't bring a sword to whittle on a stick. It's kind of overkill. Yeah. Pocket knife's generally what you want to go with that. Or to cut rope, or basically anything else that you would need a blade for in scouts. A pocket knife will fill that most of the time. Secondly, the scout ranches, or summer camps. They generally do not want you to have fixed blades or sheath knives. You know, these knives that you put on your belt and they don't fold at all. It's just the sheath. Yeah, they generally prefer for you not to have those around on the camp premises. Finally, there's your regional or state blade restrictions. Now, this is different for every state, and I don't know them all, but I'll go ahead and give an example. Here in Missouri, there's really not any specific blade laws except for one. You're not allowed to own or use a switchblade knife unless you only have one hand. So, Missouri is pretty lax on blade restrictions. However, other states, that's a different matter. If you're ever going anywhere out of state, it's usually a good idea to check up on the restrictions before you go there. Next up is some actual blade safety. Oh wait, no, there's one last thing. This isn't an actual restriction, but some units like to have it to where there is a restriction on the size of your pocket knife. This isn't across the board. It's dependent on the unit. Sometimes your blade is limited by whether by the diagonal of the palm of your hand. So in which case, I actually have a bit of wiggle room. Or in some cases, they like to do it can only be as long as the width of the palm of your hand, in which case I am right in that boundary with this knife. But again, that's unit to unit. It's not the same throughout. And really that's just to make sure that 10-year-olds who just got their totem chit aren't carrying around knives 2 times larger than their hands. Also, this isn't any restriction at all, but more of a recommendation. You'll notice that some blades have a locking mechanism of some sort once you open it. I would strongly suggest that you use one of these blades that has a locking mechanism. It makes it to where the knife can't just fold in on your hand while you're whittling. I've used a few pocket knives that didn't have locks in the past, and while it was never anything serious, not having a lock on my blade has caused a few cuts on my fingers. Yeah. Nothing scarred, but generally the locking mechanism's safer. So now back to some knife safety. First off, when you're handing a knife to another person, you need to make sure that it is closed or sheathed if you're using a sheath knife. Next, when you hand it to someone, you don't let go until they say thank you.
Thank you.
This makes sure that you know that they have a good grip on the knife and that they won't drop it. If they drop the knife, it can cause the knife to pop open, get damaged, or could bounce and hurt someone somehow. It's one of those things you should always be cautious. And now they're not going to let go until I say thank you. Next up is something we call the blood circle, or in some places it's called the danger zone. Now, what this is it's basically your range with your knife. This determines basically your boundary of where only you should be the only living person in this boundary. Basically what it is to determine your blood circle or danger zone, you open your knife and you hold it by the back of the blade, the part that's not sharp, and you kind of hold it out like this, and you slowly kind of spin around, and it's basically arm's length plus the length of the handle. This is just to set up your range. Basically, no one else should come into your blood circle. You should not open a knife while someone else is in your blood circle, because that is dangerous. Next, we're going to get into some blood circle etiquette. Now, this may seem hard to believe, but I have actually seen this happen before. This is an example of poor blood circle etiquette. One scout decided that he wanted to do some whittling. So what he did is he went over to where everyone was at, because he also wanted to, be in the general conversation, just socialize. And he plopped down kind of in between two scouts while they were around the fire. And he plopped down in a seat, pulled out his pocket knife and said, "Blood circle," expecting the others to move out of the way for his blood circle. It's very rude, first of all, to go somewhere where there's already people, pop open your knife, and then expect them to get out of your blood circle. Because it's one of those things of, they were there first. You shouldn't try and force them to move just because you want to whittle. If that's the case, you should kind of go off on your own, or kind of just a little bit farther away from everyone, just a safe distance. That is the polite thing to do. Then also, I've seen people whittling and no one's in their blood circle, but they're in a generally high traffic area, like there's a picnic table in your campsite and they're whittling at the picnic table. No one's around the picnic table at the moment, but people will be eventually, because that's generally going to be one of your main meeting areas in the camp. And it's generally just a good idea to kind of avoid those places, to try and not be in the way. I've also seen someone sit down near the kitchen and start whittling, and then expect people to just work around them while they're whittling, and the cooks for the meal are being forced to work around him too. Yeah. it's very annoying, but it's one of those things. Are you gonna be in the way? If so, then try not to be there. Then, at the same time, there's also, I've seen cases of a scout is whittling, and other scouts decide to go over there and sit down beside him in his blood circle, even though he's pretty much out of the way for the most part, and expect the scout with the knife to put their knife away because they're now in their blood circle. That is also wrong. It's another thing of they were there first, so don't force them to do something. It's just one of those things of try and be polite. That's really all that is. Next is blade upkeep. So first, it's important to keep your knife sharp. The reason for this is a dull blade is actually more dangerous than a sharp one. I know that sounds weird, doesn't it? But a sharp blade is going to make a straight cut. If you do accidentally cut yourself, it'll be a straight, clean cut. But if your blade is blunt, or is not quite as sharp as it should be, instead of making a straight, clean cut, it is instead going to rip the skin. It'll tear rather than slice. What this does is it makes that wound a lot harder to treat, and it's going to make it a lot messier. So it's really just better to keep your knives sharp. Here we have a few different tools for sharpening your knife. This is your usual kitchen knife sharpeners. Put your knife, and you basically just, it has two kind of sharpening stones on the inside, making a V shape. So pretty much all you have to do is just put the knife in, draw it back across those sharpening stones, and it should hone your blade fairly nicely. Next is the older school knife sharpener for the kitchen, and it's basically you basically just swipe your blade across it, generally at an angle of about 30 degrees, I believe. Either 30 or 45, but I'm pretty sure it's 30. And just make sure that when you're doing it this way, you also need to make sure that you do the same on the other side of the blade. This is a whetstone. Now this is a very basic whetstone, generally the type of whetstone that you'll probably be taking to camp. There are some really nice kitchen whetstones, but not generally what you would want to take on a camp out. So first things first, the whetstone, you need to get it wet, as the name implies, generally with water, but I believe you can also use oil, but basically the water's generally handier. Basically what it is you just bring the knife across like that, across the top, about at a 30-degree angle. Now, of course, you're not a human compass, so you're not nor human protractor, so you're probably not gonna have it perfect all the time, but generally try and get close to that 30 degrees. Then, of course, you need to do the other side. Now, there are some really nice kitchen whetstones uh, that generally have a coarse and a fine side. Um, you want to sharpen on the coarse side first, and then flip it over and use the fine side of the whetstone. Um, it makes for a sharper blade. But again, that's usually one of those much nicer whetstones that you probably don't want to take camping. Uh, Next, it's also important to always keep your knife clean. A clean knife is a safe knife. A dirty knife, if you accidentally cut yourself, can cause you to get an infection. And that's generally just not a good thing to have. So try and keep the blade clean. It also helps to keep, like, say you use your pocket knife to whittle on a stick. You probably don't. You probably want to clean the pocket knife before you decide to use it to cut your pork chop for the night at supper. Because that's generally more sanitary. It's one of those things of keep it sharp, keep it clean, and you'll have a lot less problems. Finally, we're going to close off with the final and most important rule of knife safety. Thou shalt not be stupid with sharp objects. If you're going to do something with a knife, think to yourself, is this going to damage the blade? Or if this slips, will I hurt myself or anyone around me? If the answer is yes, or potentially yes, you probably shouldn't be doing it. But anyway, that's it for knife safety, guys. Be safe, don't cut yourselves. Goodbye.